Well, hello again, friends. Apparently, I'm in the school today because I'm going to be teaching you a lesson about the rank 6 personas. And before we get started, just a huge thank you. I got some messages the other day that I crossed 6,000 subscribers, which means that quite a few of you have subscribed, probably liked videos and all those sorts of good things. And also, I've just been getting a ton of great reception, a lot of people joining the live streams, a lot of new members to the channel, and tons of super chats. The reception's been phenomenal. I could have never anticipated this happening. And so just know that you are quite literally warming my heart. So thank you so much for your support. But with that, as we get into it, of course, if you haven't liked and subbed, if you wouldn't mind doing that, we'll keep this channel growing. And let's talk about our rank 6 personas. So these are, once you hit your account level 60, and so let's go into the compendium here. And I've taken a look at these and kind of narrowed down to a couple that I think are really good, and then some that have kind of interesting situational uses. As usual, if I don't specifically cover a particular persona, it doesn't mean they're hot garbage and you should never look at them. It just usually means that there's either something you've already had from a prior, book 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that is better for that specific role, or maybe they're just a, DPS type. And so, for example, I don't really have much to say about this one right here, Barong, probably said that wrong. But if you needed, say, a single target electric unit for possibly the Velvet Trials or something else, then this one would be perfectly fine. I don't see any reason why you couldn't, build them up and run them. It's just that they're not giving you something in addition with their kit that makes them unique or, something to really stand out and look at. So let's cover the ones that do, though. So the first one I want to talk about is Garuda. Garuda is wind. And what's interesting here is a couple things. One, you get Racunda, so you can decrease the foe's defense, which is always a good skill to have on hand. And then two, you increase your attack, and then after using a wind skill on foes, increase main target's wind damage taken by 14%. So what makes this a particularly interesting or good persona is when you pair it with wind units. So something like Fleuret, for example, being able to increase the target's wind damage taken when running wind teams and having winded status, these things all stack to allow you to do more damage. So if I was running a wind team and I wanted a rank 6 persona, this is the kind that I would be looking for. All right, so I'm going to skip around a little bit. Surt's actually technically the next one, but he is one of my favorites in this grouping, and he's one that lasts into the end game. And so I want to come back to him and have a bit deeper of a discussion. But there's two that actually fill a very similar role, and that's going to be Moloch and Pale Rider. And so Moloch and Pale Rider both have a similar function to where they increase ailment resistance, and when an ally is inflicted with a debuff, they increase their ailment resistance even further. And then if I look at Pale Rider, you're going to see, or actually that's Black Rider, sorry, so many riders, I get them mistaken. You're going to see something very similar to where increased resistance to ailments, and when they have a debuff, increase their ailment accuracy. And so what's nice about these is if you happen to go into content that is heavy in ailments, you're getting put to sleep a lot or whatever, these can help you there. They're very fringe case, they're very niche. So it's not like the kind of unit that you want to build up and like really just drive home all the time. But it's definitely ones where if you are in that kind of a situation where you're just getting, constantly dizzy, constantly put to sleep, constantly whatever, then like, especially with Moloch, you can really get into the point to where you're resisting those ailments quite a bit. So again, I wouldn't rush to build these two, but they can be helpful in that sort of a situation. All right, so then we have Parvati. I bring this one up as a healer, but from a healer's perspective, I don't think she's amazing necessarily, but what she does have that can be useful for like a Yusuke team is that after healing, you can increase their defense by a little bit. I'm not building this one for my Yusuke team, but usually healers come up in the comments quite a bit. It's a single target one. It does have a Sai skill, which can help in Velvet Trials. But in Velvet Trials, I'd probably just build a persona that does actual side damage as opposed to having a side move on like a support unit. But this one, like I said, I want to bring it up because you do get a bit of a buff to defense for whoever you're healing. I don't think I'll be building her, but it was worth at least noting that. But I will say one of the first really interesting ones I like is going to be Scotty. So Scotty, this is a great one to build if you're facing tougher content that isn't ailment resistant. So they have a couple things here. So first of all, their ailment accuracy is increased just by default of their innate here. And then after inflicting debuffs, increase attack and crit rate. Now you're probably not using Wonder for, your main DPS, but just in case you are. And then if spiritual ailment, increase accuracy 35% for 2 turns. And then they come pre-equipped with 2, pretty fun ailments. So the first one is enrage. And so if you have, enemies that you're going against that have particularly devastating skills, this will make it so that they're only going to do their melee attacks against you, and it's just on random targets. And so this can take a lot of pressure off of some really nasty skills. And then they also have Dazzler over here, which chance to inflict dizzy on the foe for 2 turns, which makes them unable to act. So again, this one is specific to if you are in content that is not resistant to ailments. This is a good way to kind of cheese yourself through some of those harder fights. And then as far as their thief tactic, their highlights, they do increase the damage taken on the enemy by 16.9% for 2 turns. So not a bad highlight if you find yourself able to use it. Maybe you've used your DPSs already, things of that nature. But a good one if you find yourself in content that you can cheese out with spiritual aim, and Scotty comes in handy for that. All right, so next up is a persona that we can all get through Lufel's business plan, so you don't necessarily have to build her separately, and that's Titania. So of the healers in this particular realm, I like her better than the other one. So for her innate, increase healing by 18%. When healing with the skill, 55% chance to inflict a random elemental ailment on a foe. The reason I like this is we're about to get Makoto. So if you are running Makoto in a team without a healer, and maybe you're bringing Titania with you to kind of fill in that role for just some, clutch healing or things of that sort, then you can potentially inflict additional elemental ailments, which works into her kit. So it's got a weird kind of chance synergy specific to Makoto in that regard, but also elemental ailments are good to have on enemies anyways. And then she has, a fairly decent multi-target heal or party heal. Again, from a healing perspective, your true healers are better than Wonder, but you wouldn't be completely subbing out a true healer for this unless you just didn't need a ton of healing. So this is still a little bit of that fringe case of you don't want to bring a dedicated healer, and you maybe just need a couple like small heals just to get through something as a backup plan. That's when I might look at something like a Titania. But specifically, again, for this elemental ailment piece, it could be really good on a team with Makoto if you needed that extra healing. And they do have Concentrate. Now, granted, you can inherit skills across different personas, but having Concentrate, if you are going to launch some spells, is not a bad thing to have. So Titania, not terrible. I'll likely build her and, maybe stick her into my Makoto team. We'll see. Then we have Seth. Seth is a gun damage dealer. And Seth is pretty cool because what they do, forget about all this extra, crit and stuff for Wonder. After knocking down a foe, increase attack and increase party damage by 8%. So right here, you're getting extra party damage for knocking someone down. And their innate skill, or whatever you want to call this power, is a gun skill that on a critical hit removes 1 more down point. So if you're looking up here, you've got increased critical damage. You've got an ability to remove extra down points. This actually comes in handy in things like in things like the Velvet Trials. So a lot of times you might be dealing with situations where you don't have like all the elemental coverage you want. You can bring something like a Seth to help decrease those down points a bit further on the enemies when you're getting, those critical hits. So not one to skip on. I will likely build him as well and try to bring him through some Velvet Trials, if I find myself needing that extra bit of down kind of coverage. So a decent one. And then for your fire users out there, we've got Baphomet. This one's interesting because their innate skill up here, after dealing skill damage to burning foes, increase all foes' fire damage taken 20%. I will say that I tested this before filming. I wanted to see if you could trigger this off of another character's skill usage, but it's not. You do have to launch the skill from Baphomet with Wonder. So like you can come in here and like launch a Red Hot, and that will go through and kick in this extra piece here. So it's a good way to amp up some extra fire damage on a higher level persona. And again, great for something like an on team. You'd come in, hopefully they're already burning because of Ki. And then you launch like this Red Hot or something like that, or the power of your choice. And now you're taking extra fire damage for when Alan's turn comes up. So not a bad one. And it leaves me with kind of 3 to talk about. So the first one I want to tell you about is, I'm not going to try to pronunciate that, this guy here. So to get him, you have to use these top end coins. These top end coins you get from SoS. And right now we don't have any. So even if you're playing from day one, you won't start getting these until next week, and it's going to take you 2 weeks to get up to this 300 mark. The problem with this particular persona is he's not going to synergize particularly well with any teams right now. So there's not really a reason to have him. By comparison, King Frost is like best in slot for your Yusuke teams. And Bisha Mountain is who you're going to want when you pull Queen, should you be pulling her. And so either of these two are going to bring so much more value to your team compositions than this guy over here. And so it puts you in a situation where you have to really consider where you're spending these top end coins after you earn them and such from SOS. And you don't want to throw them around just willy-nilly. Really think about who and when you're going to use those, or if you want to save them. I'm personally going to use mine for Queen. So my first pick will be here, even though I already have Yusuke. And I would love King Frost for him. This is just the most value. And so from a rank 6 perspective, yes, he is opened up technically. And next week I could get him. I would tell you to skip this for a very long time. A super long time. So not much to say about him other than I really think you should skip him. And then that brings us to two more, my two favorite, and the two that I truly recommend you build for this particular level range. First one is Norn. So Norn is fantastic. What they do, or he or whatever, is increase defense by a certain percentage. After inflicting Windswept, decrease target's defense by 22.8. So Windswept comes a couple different ways. Primarily, it comes from wind attacks from things like Garodyne. But on Wind Barrier, so this skill here, you give a shield to your allies for a certain value, and then when they take damage, they also have a chance to inflict Windswept. So now it's no longer just because you are hitting with a wind skill. When you get hit, you have a chance for this to go off, and I'll tell you, it goes off a lot, especially when you're in AoE content, just from my own experience using them on KR. And then for the Thief Tactic, for your highlight, you grant a shield for a couple turns, so it gives you a little bit of that defensive edge. So once you've got Windswept and this innate going off, it's actually a pretty substantial decrease in defense. And the way to kind of look at building this particular persona, there's a few different ways, but what I personally like to do is keep like the Windsweep bonus. I don't really care so much about Zyodyne on this one, but what I might want to look at is maybe building up my resistances, or adding like a shield boost, or you can look at, and something I'd super recommend, is really thinking about adding in an AoE wind skill so that you have both single target and AoE coverage. So now that you're getting kind of into these more endgame personas, you really want to kind of think about what can I inherit on this particular persona to make them better and make them last longer, into the life cycle of the game, of course, because you will use Norn for quite some time. They really are a truly great, unit. And the thing too is you don't have to jump straight into like the tier 3s. So let's say, for example, I don't know, maybe you want to use like a shield boost innate that you could inherit on them. You could get like the tier 1 or 2 first and kind of build your way into tier 3 later when you have more coins to fuse personas. Or, like if you're looking for, I don't know, like you wind boost or stuff like that, you could start with a 1 or 2 or 3 and then move yourself up into 4s. You don't have to necessarily start at the top and try to burn all these coins. It's okay to build into them. So Norn, I'm going to highly recommend you build this unit. Look at what you want them for. As I think through it, I'm going to pick the AoE wind skill, and I'll just swap them out. When I want AoE, I'll put the AoE on. When I want single target, I'll put Garodyne on. And then I'll probably do a shield boost, just so that the shields are a little, I don't know, I guess stronger, if you will. I'll definitely drop Zyodyne. I don't really see much use for that. And I don't know. I mean, he's already got winded boost, so that's a good one to have. I might give an EHR boost on there, just EHR being attack ailment accuracy, to really make sure that winded lands. Those are the kinds of things I'll think about for building my Norn. And that leaves us really with my absolute favorite from this pile. As simple as he is, we're going to talk about Cert. Cert is beautiful for this move right here. Decrease all foes' defense by 25.7% for 3 turns. So he is your AoE, Raccoonda, your AoE defense down. And he's a great unit to just bring in, launch that power, and then your next turn move over to a different persona. And so the way that I like to build him, again, is more for things like keeping him alive. I don't necessarily need him to do a ton of skills. He's not really there for that. So things that you can look at for him are like resist damages, resist ice since he's a fire unit. You could put extra life on him, things that are going to make you survive. So that way for that one turn after you launch his power, if you're getting hit by something, you're just taking effectively less damage. anything of that kind of survivability realm, I think is what you want to do for your cert. And again, you're not going to sit on this persona. You're going to cast your skill and move on to somebody else, maybe go throw a crit, boost on somebody. So I would think about making them more tanky or them making you more tanky so that you don't get, shot down while you're sitting there on this particular persona. But don't sleep on Marakunda. This skill is incredibly good for things like SOS and Guild Boss. So anytime you're in these kind of score-based modes where you have multiple enemies, so particularly AoE fights, you're going to want to bring Cert. I use him, frankly, all the time. So happy that he opens up here. I will eventually fully max him out and do all the duplicates. To me, he's that valuable that you want to fully build this one out. Those are my favorites. So super recap here. Use your Garuda for your win teams. For your healers, I would skip Parvati personally, and I would more focus on Titania if you even want a healer. Seth is kind of a niche unit that you can look at for helping with removing the little down shield things. Not amazing, but decent. You've got Baphomet for fire teams. And then, you've got some like resist ailments. You may not ever use Moloch, honestly. It's just an interesting one to me. And then your big winners, you're going to want to build Cert, and you're really going to want to build Norn over here. So I'm working on that. I haven't quite gotten to the point that I've built these up yet completely, but these are definitely my top 2 priorities right now before I get to the next tier. That's it, my friends. So hopefully that's of help to you. In the comments, ask questions if you have any. And on our way out, as always, if you wouldn't mind helping us continue to grow and helping get this message out there by dropping a like and a sub, it'd be super appreciated. And until our next video or live stream, my friends, please take care of yourselves.